My name is Arthur Finch. I'm 48 years old, and for the last 20 years, my life was the woods. Before that, it was the Army. I was a scout, spent most of my time learning how to become a ghost in places that wanted me dead. When I got out, I came back home to Pennsylvania and took those skills into the Allegheny National Forest. I ran a small guide service with my friend, Cal Rask. We took folks out for hunting, tracking, survival training. We were good at it. We knew the woods, every ridge and hollow, every creek bed and game trail. We thought we did, anyway. What I'm about to tell you is the reason I don't go into the deep woods anymore. It's the reason Cal lives in a small apartment in Pittsburgh and won't look at a tree without flinching. It's the reason a young man named Brian Keller is listed as a missing person, presumed victim of a bear attack. The official report is a lie. I know because I was there. I'm the one who survived. I'm telling this because the official story protects people from a truth they aren't ready for. But sometimes, the truth is the only thing that can keep you alive. It was late October, a few years back. The air had that sharp, clean bite to it, the promise of an early winter. The leaves were mostly down, carpeting the forest floor in a sea of rust and gold. Cal and I had a client, Brian. He was in his late 20s, a software developer from Philadelphia who'd made a lot of money and decided he wanted a dose of what he called authentic masculinity. He'd booked a 5-day trophy buck hunt with us. We were taking him to our most remote cabin, a place we called the Last Nail. It was nestled deep in the northern section of the forest, a good 10 miles from the nearest paved road and another 5 down a gravel track that was more suggestion than path. The Last Nail wasn't much to look at, just a single-room log cabin we'd shored up over the years. It had a sturdy wood stove, 4 bunks, a heavy oak door, and 2 small shuttered windows. It was solid, defensible. That wasn't a word I would have used to describe it back then. Back then, it was just cozy. We got there in the early afternoon, the truck groaning and complaining up the last incline. Brian was all enthusiasm, snapping pictures with his phone, talking about how disconnected everything felt. He was a nice enough kid, just green. The kind of green that gets you into trouble if you're not careful. He cracked jokes, called Cal Sergeant Slaughter because he was an ex-Marine, and asked me if I'd ever had to fight a bear with my bare hands. "No, Brian," I'd said, pulling our gear from the truck bed. "The goal is to never be in a situation where that's an option." He laughed, but Cal and I didn't. That was rule number 1 out here. You don't tempt fate. You respect the woods, or the woods will teach you respect. The hard way. We spent the rest of the day getting settled, chopping firewood, and making a plan for the morning's hunt. As dusk settled, a deep, profound silence fell over the forest. It was a comfortable sound to me and Cal, the sound of peace. The first wrong thing happened that night. We were sitting around the stove, drinking coffee laced with a little whiskey. Brian was telling some long story about his office politics. I wasn't really listening. My ear was tuned to the world outside. And in that world, there was nothing. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustle of a field mouse in the leaves. The complete and total absence of sound was the sound. It was an unnatural blanket of quiet. I glanced at Cal. He was looking at the shuttered window, his brow furrowed. He'd noticed it too. "Quiet tonight," Cal said, his voice low. Brian stopped mid-sentence. "Yeah, peaceful, right? No sirens, no traffic, just this." He gestured to the cabin around him. I shook my head slightly. "No, too quiet." "Something's got the woods holding its breath." Brian scoffed, a nervous little laugh. Come on, Arthur. It's just the wild. This is what we came for. He tried to make it a joke, but his eyes kept flicking towards the door. The seed of unease was planted. Later, hours after we'd turned in, I was woken up by a sound. It wasn't loud. It was a rhythmic, methodical thump, thump, thump. It was distant, coming from somewhere down the ridge. It was slow, deliberate. My first thought was a woodpecker, but it was the middle of the night. My second thought was someone chopping wood, but the rhythm was too steady, too monotonous. And who would be chopping wood out here at 2 a.m? I lay in my bunk listening. The sound continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence that rushed back in felt heavier than before. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning I mentioned the sound to Cal as we were prepping our packs. Brian was still asleep, snoring softly. You hear that knocking last night? I asked, keeping my voice down. Cal nodded, his face grim. Heard it. Sounded like someone hitting a tree with a rock. Same spot for the whole time. We stood there for a moment, the unspoken question hanging in the cold air between us. Pranksters? A poacher? Neither made sense. You'd have to be insane or lost to be out here, miles from anything, just banging on a tree in the dead of night. We decided to be extra cautious. We'd stick together, keep our heads on a swivel. We woke Brian and set out just before dawn. The forest floor was damp, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. We moved slowly, quietly, tracking a set of buck prints I'd found near a creek bed. Brian, to his credit, was trying. He was clumsy and loud, but he was trying to follow our lead. About a mile from the cabin, we found it. It was a doe, or what was left of one. It was lying in a small clearing, and it hadn't been killed by a predator I recognized. A bear would have mauled it, taken a haunch, and probably buried the rest. A coyote pack would have stripped it clean, scattering the bones. This was different. The doe's torso was ripped open with incredible force, the rib cage splayed out like a broken fan. But nothing was eaten. The organs were spilled onto the leaf litter, but they were untouched. The head and all 4 legs were gone, not chewed off. They were gone. There were no drag marks, just the torso, a few spatters of blood, and tracks. The tracks were what stopped my heart. They were huge, vaguely canine but wrong. They were too long, too narrow, and they showed a distinct heel print. And there were only 2 of them. They came into the clearing, stopped at the doe, and then walked away. Bipedal. Something that walked on 2 legs had done this. I knelt, my rifle held ready in my hands. I'd been hunting my whole life. I'd seen what bears, wolves, and mountain lions could do. This was none of them. What the hell did this? Brian whispered. His face was pale. The bravado from the day before was gone. Cal was circling the clearing, his own rifle up, his eyes scanning the dense tree line. Arthur, he said, his voice tight. Whatever it was big. Look at the stride on these things. The tracks were spaced nearly 6 feet apart. I stood up and looked at Cal. We didn't need to say anything. The hunt was over. Our only priority now was getting Brian out of here safely. We're going back to the cabin, I announced. Pack your essentials. We're hiking out to the truck and leaving. Brian just nodded, his eyes wide with fear. The walk back was the most tense mile of my life. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every snap of a twig made my skin crawl. The woods were no longer a place of peace. They were watching us. I could feel it, a prickling on the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. The unnatural silence was back, pressing in on us. We made it to the cabin without incident. But the feeling of being watched never left. If anything, it intensified as we got closer. It felt like we were being herded back. I told Brian to get his gear together inside while Cal and I did a quick sweep of the immediate area. The knocking sound from the night before, the tracks. This wasn't random. It felt territorial. We found more tracks near the woodpile, just 30 yards from the cabin door. They had come close during the night. They had been watching us sleep. "We're not hiking out," Cal said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not with darkness coming in a few hours. If that thing is out there, it'll have the advantage. We stay here, lock it down, and wait for morning. We make a break for the truck at first light." It was the right call. A panicked run through the woods in the dark was a death sentence. The cabin was our only defensible position. It was solid log construction. We had food, water, and firearms. We could hold out for a night. We brought in as much firewood as we could stack by the door. We bolted the heavy wood shutters over the 2 windows and barred the door from the inside with a thick iron beam. The cabin was plunged into near darkness, lit only by a couple of kerosene lamps. The world shrank to the 4 walls of that room. Brian was sitting on his bunk, shivering, though it was warm from the stove. "What is it?" he kept asking. "What's out there?" "We don't know," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "And it doesn't matter. All that matters is what's in here. We're safe in here." But I didn't believe it. Not really. As the last of the daylight faded, the forest came alive with sound again. But it wasn't the familiar chatter of woodland creatures. It was something else. A low, guttural growl echoed from the ridge, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It was a sound of pure, predatory malice. Then another answered it, from the opposite direction. There were at least 2 of them. They were communicating. They were coordinating. We took up positions. I took the front door, Cal the back wall where one of the windows was. We had our rifles, extra magazines laid out on the small table. Brian, who had a new-in-the-box .30-06 he'd barely fired, was told to stay low and keep the lamps fueled. He was useless as a fighter now. He was paralyzed by fear. For the next hour, nothing happened. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and Brian's ragged breathing. The tension was a physical thing, a weight in the air that made it hard to breathe. Then came the first touch. It was a soft, scraping sound against the back shutter. Scrape. Then a pause. Then another. Scrape. It was the sound of a claw testing the wood. Cal didn't move. He just stood there, his rifle aimed at the center of the shutter, his knuckles white. The scraping stopped, and then we heard sniffing. Loud, wet, curious sniffs, right at the seam of the shutter. I could picture a long snout pressed against the crack, a dark eye peering into the blackness of our fortress. Suddenly there was a loud bang on the front door that made all of us jump. It sounded like someone had thrown a boulder against it. The heavy oak shuddered in its frame. "They're trying to draw our attention," Cal hissed. "One at the back, one at the front. They were smart. They were testing our defenses, trying to find a weak point, trying to split our focus." Another bang on the door, harder this time. Then a new sound, a low, guttural chuffing right outside. It was talking to itself. The thing at the back started pushing against the shutter, not hitting it, but applying steady, immense pressure. The wood groaned, the hinges creaking in protest. Cal braced his shoulder against the wall next to the window. "It's strong, Art, really strong." On the other side of the cabin,
The thing at the door began to scratch.
Long, deep gouges in the oak. I could hear the wood splintering. They weren't just animals driven by instinct. This was methodical. It was an attempt to dismantle our shelter, piece by piece. Then, we heard a different sound from outside. It was a voice. A woman's voice crying for help. "Please, help me. I'm lost." Brian shot up from his bunk. "There's someone out there. We have to help her." I grabbed him by the shoulder and threw him back down. "Stay down. That's not a person." The voice came again, closer this time. "Please, it's so cold. Let me in." It was a perfect imitation, filled with panic and desperation. But there was something wrong with it, an underlying flatness, a lack of true resonance. It was mimicry. "How can you know that?" Brian sobbed, his face a mask of terror and confusion. "We can't just leave her out there." Before I could answer, the voice changed. It became a child's voice crying for its mommy. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They weren't just trying to get in. They were trying to break our minds. They were playing with us. The scratching on the door stopped. The pressure on the back shutter eased. An eerie silence fell once more. "What are they doing?" Brian whispered. "They're thinking," Cal said, his voice grim. And then we heard a new sound from above, a heavy scraping on the roof. It was on the roof. I looked up at the ceiling, at the thick timbers that supported the sod and shingles. A heavy thud, and then another. It was walking on our roof. I imagined the weight, the sheer mass of the thing just a few feet above our heads. A shower of dust and dirt rained down from between the ceiling planks. That was when I got my first partial glimpse. The thing on the roof moved towards the edge, and its head and shoulders dipped down, silhouetted against the faint starlight in the gap above the front door. It wasn't a bear. It was long and narrow, a distinctly canine skull, but massive. The shoulders were impossibly broad, wider than the head, with a thick ruff of dark fur. It had pointed ears that swiveled, listening. It turned its head, and for a second I saw the glint of an eye, an intelligent, malevolent eye. Then it pulled back, and the silhouette was gone. I felt a cold dread wash over me, colder than the October air. This was a nightmare made real. We were trapped in a box, and the monsters were trying to figure out how to open it. The one on the roof started throwing things, not randomly. It was dropping heavy rocks onto the stovepipe. Clang! The pipe rattled, threatening to buckle. If it broke the stovepipe, the cabin would fill with smoke. It would flush us out. "It's trying to smoke us out," Cal yelled over the noise. The plan was terrifyingly simple and terrifyingly smart. I grabbed the poker from beside the stove. "We have to put the fire out." We couldn't risk it. We threw open the stove door and started frantically scooping the burning logs and embers out onto the stone hearth. The cabin filled with a haze of smoke, but it was better than being asphyxiated. The rocks kept coming, denting and bending the metal pipe until it was nearly flattened. With the fire dying, the cabin grew cold fast. We were left in the flickering light of a single kerosene lamp. The sounds from outside changed again. The one at the front door began to push, a steady, rhythmic shoving that synchronized with the thud of its own heartbeat. Thump, push, thump, push. The door bowed inward with each impact. The iron bar holding it was groaning, the brackets straining against the screws. It wasn't going to hold forever. This went on for what felt like an eternity. The relentless pressure, the psychological warfare, the knowledge of the immense, intelligent things that surrounded us. Brian had been reduced to a whimpering ball on his bunk. Cal and I stood back to back in the center of the room, rifles pointed at the two main entry points. We were in a siege, waiting for the walls to fall. The turning point came with the sound of splintering wood. It wasn't the door. It was the back shutter, the one Cal was watching. The thing outside had stopped pushing and had started to pry. It had found a purchase at the bottom edge and was using its incredible strength to peel the heavy wood away from the window frame. "Art, I need you," Cal shouted. I spun around. The bottom of the shutter was visibly bending outward, a dark crack of night appearing. And then a hand came through. It was not an animal's paw. It was a hand. A huge, 5-fingered hand covered in coarse, dark fur, but the structure was undeniably primate. The fingers were long and tipped with thick, yellowed claws. The hand groped blindly, then curled around the splintered edge of the shutter and pulled. The wood screamed as it was torn from its hinges. The window was open. In that instant, the creature outside the front door gave one final, titanic shove. The iron bar snapped, the brackets ripped free from the wood. The door flew open, slamming against the inside wall. And there it was. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the pale moonlight, stood the thing from my nightmares. It was enormous. It had to be 8 feet tall, standing on 2 long, digitigrade legs that bent backwards like a dog's. Its body was a grotesque fusion of man and wolf, lean but powerfully muscled, with arms that were too long for its torso, ending in those same clawed hands. Its head was purely canine, a long muzzle filled with yellow teeth, its dark eyes glowing with a faint, reflected light. It took a step inside, ducking its head to clear the door frame, and let out a low growl that was less a sound and more a physical force. At the same moment, the other one began to force its way through the back window. Its massive head and shoulders filled the frame. Cal fired. The roar of his rifle was deafening in the small cabin. The shot hit the creature in the shoulder. It shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pain and rage, and recoiled, disappearing from the window. The one in the doorway didn't even flinch. It just turned its head slowly, fixing its glowing eyes on Cal. It saw him as the immediate threat. I raised my rifle and fired twice into its chest. The heavy .308 rounds hit it with an audible whump, whump. It staggered back a step, a surprised grunt escaping its throat. But it didn't fall. It looked down at its chest, at the dark, spreading stains on its fur, and then it looked back at me. And the look in its eyes was not pain. It was fury. It was a look that said, "You have no idea what you are dealing with." That was when Brian broke. He scrambled up from his bunk, screaming, a wild, incoherent sound of pure terror. He didn't run for cover. He ran for the open door. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he thought he could outrun it. Maybe he wasn't thinking at all. He just ran. "Brian, no!" I screamed. He was halfway to the door when the creature moved. It wasn't a run. It was a blur. It covered the 10 feet between them in a single, fluid lunge. It didn't use its teeth. It swiped at him with one of its long arms. The blow caught Brian across the chest. The sound was a sickening, wet crunch. He was lifted off his feet and thrown backward into the wall like a rag doll. He slid to the floor and didn't move. There was no doubt he was dead. Instantly. The creature stood over him for a second, its chest still heaving from my shots. Then it turned its attention back to us. Cal fired again, this time at the creature's head. The thing was fast. It ducked, and the round splintered the door frame where its head had been a split second before. It snarled, baring its teeth, and took a step towards Cal. I knew we had seconds. Cal was reloading, fumbling with a fresh magazine. I fired my last round, aiming for its leg, trying to disable it. The bullet tore a chunk out of its thigh. It howled, a deafening sound of agony, and its strange backward-jointed leg buckled. It fell to one knee. "Cal, now!" I yelled, dropping my empty rifle and grabbing the fire poker. The creature that had been at the window was coming back, its snarling face appearing in the broken frame. The one on the floor was already pushing itself back up, ignoring the grievous wound in its leg. We were out of time. Cal slammed the new magazine home, but I knew we couldn't win a prolonged fight. "The truck!" I shouted. "We run for the truck!" It was our only chance, a suicidal, desperate gamble. "On three! Go for the door!" The wounded one was on its feet again, limping but coming for me. Its eyes burned with hatred. The other one was halfway through the window. "1, 2, 3!" We didn't wait to see if the other followed. We burst out of the cabin and into the freezing night air. I didn't look back at Brian's body. I couldn't. We ran. We crashed through the underbrush, ignoring the branches that whipped at our faces and tore at our clothes. Behind us, we heard a roar of pure frustration, followed by the heavy, loping footfalls of the wounded creature in pursuit. It was faster than I could have imagined, even injured. The truck was parked about 50 yards away on a small, level patch of ground. It felt like miles. The air burned in my lungs. My legs were screaming. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The thing was gaining. It was a terrifying sight, a giant, lurching silhouette moving through the trees with an unnatural gait. Its long arms swung, clawing at the air as it ran. The other one was right behind it. They weren't roaring anymore. They were just running, silent and focused. The sounds of their footfalls were heavy, like sledgehammers hitting the earth. We reached the truck, adrenaline surging through us. Cal fumbled with the passenger door while I scrambled for the driver's side. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. Behind me, the creature was closing in. 20 yards. 10. I wrenched the door open and threw myself inside, Cal piling in on the other side. "Get us out of here!" he screamed. I jammed the key in the ignition and twisted. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught with a roar. The wounded one was there. It reached the driver's side just as I was putting the truck in gear. Its horrifying face appeared in my window, jaws snapping, saliva hitting the glass. It slammed its shoulder into the door, rocking the entire truck. I stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the mud and leaves, then caught. The truck lurched forward. The creature wasn't letting go. It grabbed onto the side mirror with one of its huge hands and was running alongside us, trying to hold us back. I saw its fingers, thick as sausages, curl around the mirror housing. The metal groaned and began to bend. With a screech of tearing plastic and metal, the entire mirror assembly was ripped from the door. The creature stumbled, and for a second, I thought we were clear. Then the other one appeared in front of us. It stood in the middle of the narrow track, blocking our path, its arms spread wide. It was daring me to hit it. I didn't hesitate. I aimed the truck's grill at its center mass and kept my foot pressed to the floor. "Hold on," I yelled to Cal. There was a sickening thud as we hit it. The creature was thrown up onto the hood, its massive body cracking the windshield. Its face was inches from mine, separated only by a spiderweb of fractured glass. Its eyes were wide with shock and rage. Its claws scrabbled for purchase, leaving deep gouges in the truck's hood. It began to push itself up, its incredible strength on full display. It was going to come through the windshield. Cal, his face a mask of grim determination, leaned over and shoved the barrel of his rifle through the cracked glass right into the creature's face. He pulled the trigger. The muzzle flash illuminated the cabin in a blinding white light, and the sound was apocalyptic. The creature's head snapped back and it slid off the hood, disappearing from view. I didn't slow down. I ran over it, felt the sickening bump, bump as the truck's tires rolled over its body. I kept going, fishtailing on the muddy track, smashing through low-hanging branches. I drove like a madman, my only thought to put as much distance as possible between us and that place. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I was too afraid of what I might see. We drove for what felt like hours, not speaking, the only sounds our own ragged breathing and the engine's strained whine. We finally hit the paved road as the first hints of dawn were breaking the eastern sky. I pulled over, my body shaking uncontrollably. Cal was slumped in his seat, his rifle across his lap, his face pale and slick with sweat. We were alive. We had escaped, but the cost was immense. Brian was dead. Our sanctuary was violated, and our understanding of the world was shattered forever. We drove to the nearest town and went straight to the sheriff's department. I was still covered in dirt and scratches, the windshield of my truck was a disaster, and the side mirror was gone. We must have looked like lunatics. A deputy took our initial statement. I tried to be calm, to be factual. I told him everything, just as it happened. The tracks, the doe, the siege on the cabin, the creatures. I watched his face as I spoke. I saw his initial concern shift to polite skepticism, then to outright disbelief. The sheriff came in. He was an older man, weary-looking. He listened to my story again, nodding slowly. When I was done, he sighed. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice gentle, patronizing. "You've been through a major trauma. It's not uncommon for the mind to play tricks on you in a situation like that. You were out in the woods. A man in your party died. You probably saw a bear. A big one, maybe a little sick. They can be aggressive, unpredictable." "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "It walked on two legs. It used tactics. It mimicked voices. One of them tore the mirror off my truck with its bare hands." I pointed out the window at the truck. "Go look at the hood. Look at the claw marks. That's not a bear." The sheriff just gave me a sad little smile. "We'll send a team up there, a ranger and a biologist. They'll look into it. But my advice to you is to get checked out at the hospital. For shock." They took our rifles for ballistics testing. They took our official statements, which I knew they considered the ravings of traumatized men. A search party went up to the last nail a day later. They found Brian's body. The official cause of death was listed as an animal attack. The coroner's report noted extensive thoracic trauma consistent with a bear strike. They found the damage to the cabin, the spent casings. They explained it all away. A rogue bear, maybe more than one, driven by hunger before hibernation. We were lucky to have escaped. The case was closed. Brian Keller was another unfortunate soul lost to the wilderness. Cal and I were the lucky survivors, pitied for our harrowing ordeal and quietly dismissed as unreliable witnesses. No one wanted to hear the truth. It was too big, too monstrous. A bear was an explanation they could live with. A 7-foot-tall, intelligent, bipedal wolf creature was not. Only one person seemed to listen. It was an old ranger, a man close to retirement who was part of the team that went up to the cabin. He caught me a week later as I was leaving the sheriff's office for the last time. He pulled me aside, his eyes full of a deep, ancient sadness. "I believe you," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Don't go back there, Mr. Finch. Not ever. There are places in those woods, things you're better off not knowing about. Your friend, he's not the first. He just won't be the last to get an official explanation." He clapped me on the shoulder, then walked away without another word. It was the only validation I ever got. and it was terrifying. It meant it was real, and it meant the authorities at some level knew. They just chose to cover it up. That was years ago. Cal and I dissolved the guide business. He couldn't stand the silence of the woods anymore. He works in a warehouse now, surrounded by the constant noise of machinery and people. I sold my house near the forest and moved closer to the city. I work in a hardware store. People come in for nails and paint, and I tell them which brand is best. My tracking skills are useless here. My knowledge of the wilderness is a curse. I have nightmares. I see that thing's face in my window. I hear Brian scream. I wake up smelling wet fur and blood. I am, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. I vanished from my old life just as surely as if one of those things had dragged me into the darkness. I'm isolated by what I know, trapped with a truth that no one wants to believe. Sometimes I wonder about the one we hit with the truck, the one Cal shot through the windshield. Did we kill it? Or did its packmates drag it away? I wonder if they're still out there, in the deep, dark parts of the forest, watching and waiting. So that is my story. It's not a tale of heroism. It's a report of a failure to protect my client, a failure to understand the world I thought I knew so well. I'm telling you this for one reason. If you ever find yourself deep in the woods and the birds go silent, if you ever hear a sound that doesn't belong, don't try to explain it away. Don't be a skeptic. Don't be a hero. Just leave. Get in your car and drive away, and don't ever go back. Because some things are real whether you believe in them or not. And they are hungry.